You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Before we begin, a brief reminder to rate us on iTunes. Your thoughts and comments are much appreciated and help to make this show that much better. Today's topic, how to photograph our hometown, the Milky Way. Thanks to a combination of improved image quality and dramatic increases in the low-light gathering abilities of modern imaging sensors, astrophotography, the art and craft of photographing the night sky, has become increasingly popular. And don't think the camera manufacturers haven't noticed. Today, John Harris and I will be talking with Ian Norman, who is the founder of Lonely Spec, a website chock full of tutorials, essays, and gear reviews on everything having to do with astrophotography, also known as night or dark sky photography. The purpose of Lonely Spec is to learn everything there is to know about astrophotography using existing technologies and sharing this information with others so that anybody out there, and we know you're out there, can take amazing photographs of the night skies. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Were you into photography before stargazing, or what came first?
I was given a digital camera in high school. I think I was a freshman, and I got the original digital Rebel. That was my first real camera. I had played around with our family cameras and messed around with a manual.
3.6 megapixels or something like that?
It was 6.3.
6.3, that's right.
6.3 megapixels, and pretty terrible at low light by current standards, but it could do long exposures. It had a bulb mode on it.
Right.
And I had a kind of crappy telescope that was given to me that I had never really used. And when I realized that you could combine these two things, a camera and a telescope.
Gaffer tape. Well, you need gaffer tape and duct tape. Yeah. Anything could happen.
I actually bought like a little adapter that piggybacks the camera on the back of the telescope. It actually doesn't shoot through it.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind that was that you could do these long exposures while using the special mount on the telescope called an equatorial mount.
Okay.
And you could track the motion of the stars as the Earth was rotating. So you could stay on a fixed position in the sky over a long period, like 30 minutes or something like that. Of course, normally you would do this with a motorized thing that rotates at the same rate as the Earth, so you just sort of sit back and let the camera do its thing. But being the kid that I was and not having the budget for anything like that, I actually manually tracked all of my photos.
Wow.
So I would I'd sit out in the cold and basically rotate this little dial while looking through the telescope the whole time. So sitting there with my eyeball to the viewfinder.
That's very zen.
And how
long
accurate
were your
was
exposures?
Oh, it was great, yeah, because the telescope had a very small field of view. And as long as I kept the bright star that I had been tracking, at the time I didn't know anything about the night sky, what I should be pointing at. And I was out during the summer, and I was pointing at Vega, which I was sort of lucky because Vega happens to be right on the band of the Milky Way. So you still get a lot of the kind of like clouds in there, the nebulosity. So I was pointing it at Vega, not really knowing what I was getting. And I would just sit there for 30 minutes or so and have the camera on bulb mode. I didn't know anything about the settings. I would just do it and see what happened, you know, and then sort of react to that.
Start,
you know,
right?
do it, you know, I need more time, less time, or maybe I should stop down. I don't know. And yeah, I would just keep Vega in the view of the telescope the whole time. So sitting there rotating the dial on the telescope to just rotate the one axis. And so that was my first attempt at astrophotography.
And when did you decide to kind of take it more seriously and go from there? Or did you put it down for a while and come back to it? Or
Yeah, so I put it down, I guess. I didn't put photography down. I had my camera with me all through high school, all through college. I was the photo editor of my school newspaper. So yeah, photography stuck with me all through that time, basically, going through high school and college. And I studied mechanical engineering, and I went right into a space-related job.
Oh, okay.
I got a job essentially designing rocket parts for SpaceX.
Oh, wow.
And so I was at SpaceX for like 3.5 years as a full-time, and during that time, I was doing lots of space stuff for sure, but I sort of kind of lost sight of my photography, became something very secondary. You know, it was the thing that I could do when I had time off, when I, could go out on the weekends. And I think that there was a part of that kind of really hit me. You know, I was like, I love photography so much, but my job is like making it much more difficult to do, you know? So it was kind of a negative thing.
I was just going to ask you, it's like at what point, now you have a job, you're earning a paycheck. What happens, what occurred that made you say, I'm going to walk away from all this and I'm just going to dedicate myself to taking pictures of the Milky Way?
There were a lot of things.
And make a living at it.
Yeah, there were a lot of things. I think there was always this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to turn my photography into something, something that I could be doing every single day. And maybe the idea was like, maybe I'll work for 5 years and then I'll go and I'll try to start a photography business. And that was the idea. I got to 3.5 years and I was like, I need to leave now. and it was a lot of it was with the support of my girlfriend Diana. We had been talking about different ideas of like minimalism, living more simply, and that was sort of unrelated to the idea of me leaving my job.
Right.
We're just sort of like, how can we live with kind of like less stuff, simplify our lives? And we sort of went through this process, and eventually it was like, this is cool. Now I have this time, and now I sort of like see the path to starting our own business, And so there was one day where I didn't want to go into work, and I didn't.
Okay. All right.
Essentially, I called in sick.
All right.
And I sort of sat around. I looked at all of my old photographs on the computer. My whole collection of photographs, and I was like, man, I need to do this. This is what I need to do. And so that weekend, actually, I was scheduled to go in to work that weekend. I found my boss and I was like, hey, I need to talk to you. And I put in my 2 weeks notice right there. And
big step.
Yeah. So 2 weeks later, I walked out of my job and I got on the computer and I registered lonelyspec.com on that very day. It's like February 20th.
How'd you come up with the name?
Something like that. So Lonely Spec is a very small excerpt from a monologue by Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was an astronomer, astrophysicist. He wrote Cosmos, which is actually a really big book in my childhood. I learned a lot about just the universe, and science in general.
He made science fun.
Yeah, it was written for the layman, and as a kid, I loved the stuff that he made. And he had another book called The Pale Blue Dot, and the Pale Blue Dot refers specifically to a photograph that the Voyager spacecraft took.
Looking back over its shoulder at us.
Yeah, of us, of the Earth, from somewhere out near Saturn. And it's funny because the picture is basically all noise. You look at it and it's just kind of a noisy mess. And then there's this little pixel, little kind of bluish pixel in there of the Earth.
It's humbling.
Yeah, it is, very much so. And he said, our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. And then he goes on to say, preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home that we've ever known. And, I think that just sort of resonated with me and stuck with me. Like, all right, I'll register that, and that became the name of the site.
Now, how long before from the time you registered to the time you started getting feedback from everybody out there who was looking at your work?
That's a good question. So the site started as kind of more of a personal portfolio at first. My business idea was that I would teach some workshops. I kind of knew what I knew that I wanted an excuse to go out and shoot the Milky Way. I needed a way of putting out my work and showing people that I knew what I was talking about, essentially.
Right.
So I had my personal photographs on there, and I wanted to make it sort of a welcoming site. So I wrote some articles, And the first one I wrote was how to photograph the Milky Way. And of course, you can't just write an article and put it online and suddenly get followers. There wasn't a whole lot of traffic at first. It actually took me about a year of doing a few workshops and kind of, slowly making my way and kind of living like a student, I guess, at first. And then I wrote an article about how to pick a lens for Milky Way photography. And it was actually one of the more technical, and it still is one of the more technical articles, just in terms of going into numbers, I guess, on Lonely Spec. And it was just about the things you need to think about when you want to buy a lens specifically for night photography. And I also talked about some of my favorite gear for night photography. And that article, somehow it got reshared on Reddit, I think, and exploded there on the R photography subreddit. And then it got picked up by Petapixel, and I had Petapixel contact me about it and ask if they would be allowed to republish it. And so I've always been really open with my content on the site. I license most of my photographs that are published on the site as Creative Commons so that other people can reblog about it or reshare it. So I don't really have huge restrictions on that. I also license my work too if somebody wants to use it commercially, of course. But I was like, yeah, sure, Petapixel, go ahead and reshare it. That's great. And that was like the start of the site. That was when finally I was like on the map, I guess. I wouldn't say that it went viral, but it, maybe in the photo community, it spiked.
Yeah.
And I started, seeing a little bit of blog income from affiliate sales and advertising and stuff like that.
Right.
You talk about you license some of your images. You are photographing something that anybody on this planet could photograph.
Right.
Stars. We're surrounded by every night. They're out there again for us. If you missed it last night, you can get it again tonight. How do you register your picture? Sorry for metadata and stuff, but did you ever go through, find a picture, go, that's my picture of the stars? Because everybody's taken pictures of the same stars.
Well, I mean, I tend to like the type of astrophotography that sort of has some perspective in it, if you will.
Includes some landscape and something in the foreground to give it the depth.
Yeah, I wanna have something in the foreground, and that's a part of composing that you can't really replicate, right? That's where you can worry about the lighting on the foreground or your position relative to this, I don't know, it could be a big rock spire, like a.
So it's not the stars; it's everything going on in front of the stars. That's what determines what's yours or not. Okay, that's fair.
Now, it would be fair to say that if you just took a photograph of a very specific section of the sky, and it was a relatively standard exposure, you could mistake your photograph for somebody else's because the sky is relatively unchanging. But once you add some of the foreground elements in there, you've got things like weather, you've got clouds and light pollution on the horizon, and of course the landscape, of course, that you decide to put yourself in.
How many nights out of the year would you say you're out shooting?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it changes a lot, but I try to take advantage, if possible, each moon cycle. So that would be once a month. And I think that's like a pretty good rate. So, 12 times a year or something like that.
When you say moon cycle, how many? Obviously, there are some nights that are better than others. You don't want the moon there because it'll just destroys everything for you. So every month, how many nights do you actually have, assuming that the weather is ideal, that you consider really, really prime shooting?
I tend to like it from first quarter to last quarter, basically, which means half moon to half moon.
So for 2 weeks out of the month.
So 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 weeks out of the month. And, obviously during the new moon, when the moon is essentially not out, you have the whole night to photograph the Milky Way without worrying about the moon sort of washing it out. But the moon could be a really cool element to a photograph as well. I mean, when you're shooting during, for example, the last quarter of the moon, you end up with, or you can end up with like a really cool amount of light on the foreground. The skies will tend to be bluer, so it'll almost look kind of daytime-ish
Right.
in the photograph, but then you'll also have the stars in there as well. So it can be a really cool balance of kind of the light on the foreground and then having the stars.
It's sort of like
in there.
that time of day, especially in the winter when the office lights are still on in buildings and the sun is setting behind them. You get that
You get the balance.
the balance of the indoor lighting and the outdoors.
Yeah.
A magic moment.
Can we jump back a little bit to the idea that you mentioned about living simply and how it seems to apply to your attitude toward astrophotography?
Yeah, so I've always tried to maintain the philosophy of I'm going to bring one camera and one lens for my trip out. And maybe it'll be purposeful. It'll be specifically geared towards a type of shot that I wanted. You know, maybe I'll go with an ultra wide lens so I can get like a very large landscape. Or maybe I'll go with a narrower lens, like a 50 millimeter, and kind of get like a narrower portion of the sky, or maybe use that to do like a high resolution panorama or something like that. And maintaining that philosophy of let's just take one camera and one lens, I think sort of simplifies the whole act of doing the night photography thing.
It applies to all photography too, though.
You don't have to concentrate on what lens should I have when you only have one.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you think more about the shot. You're not sitting there thinking, I really want to use my 14 millimeter now. Oh, I need more light, so let's put on the f1.4 prime. And when you don't have that thing, that sort of let's mix around the gear thing going on when you're out shooting, then you concentrate more on your composition.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that's like a good mentality to maintain. And I've maintained that every time we go out shooting at night. And I think with that comes this restriction on the gear that I would buy. I don't own an equatorial mount. I don't own a telescope. I don't have a lot of the gear that you would necessarily see a more, I don't know how you'd say, a more serious astrophotographer go after, big telescopes and dedicated CCD imaging sensors. And I think with that, it's turned astrophotography into something that's it became very accessible to me. I could just bring my camera out with a tripod and go shoot the night sky. And I wanted to write about that. I wanted to let people know that you don't.
It's okay.
You don't.
Go
you don't need a telescope. You don't have to buy the full frame sensor. I at the time I did have a Canon 6D when I started Lonely Spec. That was, and I still think is one of the best cameras that you can get, at least in the Canon lineup. It's a great camera.
So
And
maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, but what was your kind of your timeline of cameras? I mean, when you started this to what you're shooting with now?
Yeah, so I started on Canon cameras with a Digital Rebel, like I said, and eventually upgraded to the 6D by the time I had money to pay for it, I guess. And from the 6D, right after I started Lonely Spec, I bought one of the early Fujifilm mirrorless cameras. I got the XE1, which was one of their more affordable mirrorless cams, and I went out shooting, and we hiked to these sand dunes in Death Valley National Park, and I brought the XE1 with me, which I thought it was going to be sort of like the lightweight secondary camera, and I found myself using it most of the time. I loved the thing. It was amazing. And so that was like kind of eye-opening to me. I was like, wow, I can make these really great photographs on this smaller sensor, smaller camera, much lighter weight than my 6D, and going along with that idea of keeping my backpack light, which I took way too much stuff with me on that particular trip because I had the 6D and I had the multiple lenses and the Fuji with me, and then realizing that I'd rather just leave the 6D in the backpack and walk around with the Fuji since it was so lightweight, and the photographs being so amazing from it, I decided that I would switch to just a single mirrorless APS-C smaller sensor camera. So I actually got the Fujifilm X-T1 when it was released, and that was right around the time. It was about a year after Lonely Spec was started by the time I got the X-T1, and a big part of the change that I made in terms of my photography gear for this lifestyle travel was switching to a mirrorless camera.
For
Which-
reasons of weight, and
For
size
reasons of
and
weight, yeah.
logistics.
Yeah, initially it was reasons of weight, and it was because I knew that I could make a photograph that was just as good as my old Canon 6D, and it was in a smaller package. And those were my initial reasons for going to mirrorless, was the weight thing, and now it's sort of progressed way beyond that. Now I don't even, necessarily. I think that's one aspect of a mirrorless camera that I think is great, but then now there are so many other things that are attractive about them. So I got the XT1, shot with that for about a year, and when the Sony A7S came out, there was all this talk about this being the best low light camera in the world, ISO 400,000, and I was like, wow, ISO 400,000. I did a quick calculation based off of my sort of typical Milky Way exposure, which I guess I could sort of sum up. If you wanted to take a photograph of the Milky Way right now with any camera, you would go to the lowest f number of your lens, which most kit lenses like f3.5 or so, maybe f2.8 if you got a fast kit lens, and you would use a 30-second exposure and ISO 3200. That's like a good starting point. There's some refinement that you can do from there, but I think for a beginner who sort of doesn't want to have to think about it, you could use those settings and get a photograph of the Milky Way. So when the A7S came out, I sort of extrapolated. I used the rules of reciprocity to sort of figure out what you could do at
400,000.
ISO 400,000. Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
1/25
What does
a
that let
second?
you do?
You could
yeah.
hand hold it, actually,
Yeah, and
an 80th of a second. Or
I honestly, yeah. Yeah. So I was like, wow, you could basically almost shoot video. If you had a fast enough lens, you could shoot video.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is a cool idea. At the time, when the system was still new, you had to adapt lenses.
Sure.
Or you could, that was like a popular thing to do, especially since the Sony lens lineup was so small at the time. So I adapted a Voigtlander 50 millimeter f1.1 lens, which at the time was the fastest thing I could find. And I got the A7S, and I was like, I'm going to record real-time video of the Milky Way because I can, because I've got ISO 400,000. And as soon as we planned a trip around this, we went to the ancient bristlecone pine forest in California, which is this really great place that has these essentially the world's oldest trees. And it's in the deserts of California, kind of, 4 to 6 hours north of LA.
Okay.
And I turned on the camera, dialed up the ISO, and I pointed at the Milky Way, and sure enough, you can see it in real time on the back of the LCD. And I was like, wow, this is a new step for photography. This is amazing. And I really do think that sort of augmented my night photography personally. It just made composition easier. And yeah, I mean, being able to see the Milky Way in real time on the LCD, there's no other camera right now that can really do that.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we come back, we're going to talk about photo gear, and you might be surprised how easy it can be to get started in astrophotography.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BHPhotoVideo, #BHPhotoPodcast.
We are back. Let's talk about equipment a little bit. One of the neat things about your website is that you talk about the fact that you don't need exotic equipment. You can go in with your entry-level DSLR mirrorless camera and a kit lens, and you can get up and started with that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so being able to talk about using minimal gear, I think has been sort of the attraction.
Right.
I'll get people who have never done astrophotography before, and the most common question I get is, I have such and such Rebel lens with the kit lens, and can I do this? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Do you get away with JPEGs only, or is it really better to have RAW?
RAW is pretty much essential in my
So
opinion.
a camera
Yeah.
that shoots RAW would be a lowest common denominator right there.
And pretty much everything does now.
Except for the
save
lowest
for
of the lowest, yeah.
lowest of the low. But an entry level DSLR, Micro Four Thirds cameras,
Even some advanced point and shoots.
yeah,
Good
yeah,
ones.
exactly. Even point and shoots, and now cell phones, believe it or not, some
Yes.
smartphones are shooting it.
But you need a manual mode, that's for sure. Right?
Yeah, so your camera needs to be able to take at least a 15-second exposure. You want to be able to go to a relatively high ISO setting.
Which is
Yeah, I was
I
just gonna
usually
say,
like to
yeah.
suggest people to shoot around 3200 or higher. And a lot of people will think, oh, won't that add a lot of noise? And the answer is actually absolutely not, especially for Canon cameras and Canon sensors. They actually do better in low light at higher ISO. Sony sensors and Nikon sensors have a little different architecture, so they don't tend to need to be pushed high in order to get the best results out of them.
Do you keep noise reduction on when you're doing this, or is that sort of an irrelevant issue here?
I tend to turn it off so that I can do it in post-processing.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
okay.
I like to have a little bit of control over how much noise it's trying to reduce. So on Lonely Spec, I also talk a lot about how to combine data from multiple exposures together, and that's a little more advanced, but it's also a way to take your less than top end equipment and shoot a really great photograph. There's some cool post-processing tricks that you can do, like image stacking, which is a great way to reduce noise in your photographs. So you can shoot with a point and shoot, and I actually talk about that on Lonely Spec. I've got like a little shootout between some of the top like Panasonic, Sony, and Canon point and shoots out there, and what they can do shooting the Milky Way. And one of my favorite cameras, actually, one of the ones that we carry around as sort of a backup, is the little RX100. We have the Sony RX100 Mark III, and it's actually really great at photographing the Milky Way. It's a little more premium. Yeah, so it's not a cheap point and shoot, but it does have a small sensor and sort of an indicator that you don't.
That's the 1-inch sensor. That's
1 inch. Yeah.
And why does that stand out in terms of a point and shoot compared to others?
I think it stands out just based on sort of the user experience of it. It's got the little flip screen, so you can kind of do like low compositions with it. The live view tends to be good enough to see the stars, so you can focus relatively easy. And it has it automatically zooms in when you rotate the focus ring on it, and so it's sort of very fluid to use it at night.
But when you're focusing a camera, do you also put your camera into manual focus? Do you trust autofocus at night?
Yeah, you can't really trust autofocus at night. It might be possible to point it at a bright star and hit the button and get it to focus.
But infinity is not necessarily default. In other words, if it's seeking, it can't find anything.
Right.
Like a black sky or a white piece of paper. Isn't infinity kind of default, or you can't trust that to be the case?
Yeah, you can't really trust that. I mean, some
Especially
some
nowadays.
autofocus systems will stop, midway, or I think it depends on the algorithm that they're using.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, you can't really trust autofocus, so you need to be able to switch it to manual focus somehow,
So
or
manual
or
exposure and manual focus are optimum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that that might sound a little scary to a beginner, but I have a calculator actually on Lonely Spec that takes 2 parameters from your camera, or 3 rather, your sensor size, the lens focal length that you're using, which is usually marked right on the camera or on the lens, and the f number, the lowest f number that your lens can go to.
Meaning the widest aperture.
The
When
widest
you say the lowest.
aperture,
Okay,
yeah.
widest aperture.
I always like to say that the f number, f stop, aperture is always like a point of confusion for newbies, and I always like to refer it to as the f number, because that's what you see. That's what you see on the monitor. You're like, what's this funky number with an F in front of it? And I think to call it aperture.
F stands for funky, actually. It does. Yeah.
So,
But yeah, I can hear in your language that you really are kind of gearing this toward the total newbie.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
people who aren't familiar with the language of photography. Even.
yeah. So I always say low F number. You want to use a low F number because that sort of makes the most sense, rather than saying you want to use a small aperture or a large aperture. when you haven't really, maybe you're not fully accustomed
very
to
confusing
whether
concept. It really
the
is.
large aperture is the low f
low
number,
number,
and the
exactly.
small aperture is the high f number.
Yeah.
So I use f number to refer to everything. So yeah, you enter in these 3 parameters: f number, sensor size, and focal length, and it'll give you an exposure. And that's kind of like a good starting point for pretty much any camera to photograph the Milky Way. And as long as you have manual exposure mode and you set these parameters, then you should be pretty much good to go. And then your next step is just to be able to focus at night, which is certainly one challenge, and then composing your photograph.
Say you want to go beyond that. Like there are cameras out there like the Nikon D810A, and Olympus has the live composite function. If you want to go a bit further, what should you be looking for as far as cameras, sensor sizes, and lenses?
Lenses, first of all. Let's talk about
lenses especially.
Yeah, so with lenses, there's sort of a kind of a good formula for a beginner that I like to recommend. And usually we want to look for a short focal length, so a wide angle lens, and as low an f number as possible. And there happen to be a few select lenses that I tend to recommend for people with like an entry-level DSLR, especially entry-level DSLR. And those tend to be like the Tokina 11 to 16 millimeter zoom. It's a super wide-angle lens, and it has an f2.8 aperture, very low f number. And so it collects a lot of light. You want the really wide-angle view because the Milky Way is pretty big. It's kind of maybe counterintuitive when you first think about like the idea of shooting an astrophoto and using a telescope, where you're shooting a very, very small object in the sky, or no, well, maybe small isn't the right word, but a very distant object in the sky. And to do the sort of like more landscape astrophotography thing, you want a really wide-angle view, and that allows you to really get that big. The Milky Cloud, the Milky Way in your photograph with the galactic center, and so I tend to recommend very wide-angle lenses with low f numbers, and Tokina 11 to 16 millimeter, and the new version, which I think is an 11 to 20 millimeter f2.8. That tends to be a really highly recommended lens, and then also the lenses made by Rokinon. Also, Samyang, which is
Bauer. They're all the same.
They're all manufactured by Samyang.
and on your website, I noticed that you recommended that. I thought that was pretty great.
Yeah, and one of the reasons behind that is their lens designs tend to have relatively low amounts of aberration on the corners of the image when shooting at a low f number. So we tend to say at these low f numbers, and a lot of these fast primes, especially some of the older Canon prime lenses, they tend to smear the stars on the corner of the image. And that can be kind of like a distracting element to the photograph.
How much of that is correctable post?
Pretty much none of it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go in there and actually, you could maybe like individually like clone stamp with a special shape clone stamp tool to like get rid of the like weird blob distortion look of like an aberration heavy lens. But it's something that, you could spend $300 on a Rokinon lens and get really great looking stars on the corners of the image. They have a 16 millimeter f2.8 that's really highly recommended by me for people with like a Rebel or maybe a D30-100 or something like that. And also I think it's a 10 millimeter f2.8, also another super wide angle, relatively low f number, and those lenses tend to perform really great, and they're a really good value. They tend to be relatively sharp.
Yeah.
And
they're simple lenses too. I mean, without autofocus.
No autofocus, but of course we can't use it at night, so that doesn't necessarily become a detractor to not have autofocus for this type of photography.
The cameras that you're mentioning are mostly APS-C, and they're in more less expensive cameras.
Yeah.
Is that the reason you're mentioning that? Because you tend to lose something on the wide angle side. You know what I mean? Because of sensor size. So is that something you're always considering, or is it mostly the fact that they're the more affordable cameras that you like to mention them?
Yeah, they become my sort of first recommendations because the readers of Lonely Spec tend to have APS-C cameras.
people
I mean,
have.
it's sort of like the sweet spot right now for purchasing a camera if you're buying your first DSLR. So that tends to be that's the reason that I'm recommending those lenses at first. But yeah, there's definitely like a clear upgrade path to using a full frame camera.
Something I'm curious about. Let's narrow it down to, say, full-frame cameras. Now, you have a camera like, say, the Sony A7R II. It's 42 megapixel. We have the Nikon D810, D10A. Now, those are 36, I believe, megapixel.
Right.
And then you have the A7S and A7S II, only 12 megapixel.
Right.
Only about a third or a quarter of the resolving power, but far more advanced as far as light gathering abilities. What would give you better pictures for astrophotography? Would you bigger pixels, fewer pixels, lower res, but better light gathering, or?
Ultimately, the sensor actually doesn't make as much of a difference as you might think, especially when the sensor size is the same. There are some you'll definitely see a jump given for any given lens or field of view. You'll definitely see a jump going from, say, a 1-inch to a micro four thirds, and then a micro four thirds to an APS-C, and APS-C to a full frame. But when it comes to low light performance within a sensor size, like talking about the A7R Mark II versus the A7S, the differences in low light performance are there, but they're a little less tangible, especially when you're looking at a photograph, in like full view, right?
Right,
At
okay.
normal viewing distances, you tend to not really see, a really big jump. And it's funny comparing the A7S to the A7R Mark II, for example, because the resolution differences are so huge.
Yeah.
The A7R Mark II has a little less good noise performance at night, but it's
still
an
outrageous,
amazing,
but not
amazing
compared to
sensor.
the
Yeah.
S version.
Right. And you'll definitely have a little bit more noise, but you'll also have more detail in there. You'll have things that you weren't able to see on the A7S. And so
Even though the A7S will open up shadows and the murkier parts more. Am I right about that?
For any given lens, they'll actually tend to be the same.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when it comes to sort of like base levels of noise, you will see a sort of smoother picture with the A7S. But it's a small difference. It's not.
It's a lot of subtleties.
It's not $1,000 difference, basically. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, so back to let's call the beginners, in the APS-C line and the simpler lenses. What would your advice be for someone who's going out for the first time? I mean, walk us through the process, the setup. I mean, obviously we need to talk tripods and that aspect, but simple lens, simple camera, and then go.
So there are a number of things that we need to think about when we're going to go shoot the night sky. And, we're talking about equipment. There's 4 basic things that you need. You need a camera and a lens. We'll call those 2 things. Usually they come together. You need a tripod because we're going to take relatively long exposures. We're talking 15 to 30 seconds. And then you're going to need a headlamp so that you can see
what you're doing.
where you're going at night, what you're doing. And the reason I recommend a headlamp instead of just, say, a flashlight is because you want your hands free. You want to be able to handle the camera, check your focus, adjust the settings. And if you're trying to hold a flashlight at the same time as doing that, it's going to be problematic. So simple headlamp will help. And I tend to like the headlamps that switch over to a red mode. There's Petzl makes them, and I think another brand is Black Diamond, and their headlamps tend to have the little red LED mode on it so that you don't completely ruin your night vision when you're out there. You want to be able to
go
see
back and forth like this, right?
Yeah, you want to be able to see where you're going and be able to compose your photo.
Do you use any of those the telescope, any of the tripods that have the panning mechanisms that pan with the stars? Because it seems like you don't use any of that stuff.
I don't. I owned a thing called a Vixen Polari, which is a motorized equatorial mount for a camera
That's
made
what I meant to
specifically
say,
for
but
a
I couldn't
DSLR.
remember those words.
Yeah, and what you do is you mount it on a it goes on top of a tripod,
Right.
and it's got a little motor in it and you put a ball head on it just like you would.
It's in
and-
between the head and the tripod. It's a device in
Yeah,
between.
yeah, in between the ball head and the tripod, and it rotates, and you aim it at the North Star, so it ends up putting the axis of rotation in line with the axis of rotation of the Earth,
Okay.
and it sort of you use it to counteract that motion of the Earth. And I've used one, but it adds a lot of setup time because you have to get it nice and perfectly aligned with the North Star, which is difficult. And it's also heavy. I mean, it's a big thing that's made to rotate a DSLR around. So it's all metal construction. It's a very nicely made tool, but you wouldn't want to take it backpacking.
What's the longest exposure you can do before you start picking up trails?
So on most standard wide angles, like say a 24 millimeter or 28 millimeter lens on a full frame camera, or an 18 millimeter on APS-C camera, it's about 20 seconds. You can go 20 seconds, and you won't really see very much star trailing. You could zoom into 100%, and the stars, maybe depending on the part of the sky that you're looking at, they'll look like little pills, little Mike and Ike candy or something like that.
So at 30 minutes, you're seeing lines. You're not seeing stars.
30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 minutes, you would definitely see just lines.
Yeah.
If you were doing a big, long bulb exposure, you would see.
Now, is that the antithesis of what you want to do? I mean, are you out
No,
there to
not
try
necessarily.
to get... No? Okay.
Yeah, I tend to like the really sharp look of the stars, using a relatively short exposure, like a 20-second exposure, when compared especially to like a 4-minute or longer exposure. A lot of photographers like to do star trails photos where they'll have their camera shooting for an hour.
Yeah.
And usually that's made with a stack of multiple 4 or 5 minute exposures that they'll just sit there and take a ton of them.
So just jumping back a little bit, how high would you push an ISO on, let's say, a Rebel camera or a Nikon D5000 or series, something along those lines, kind of your mid-range DSLR? How comfortable would you be at 6400 or higher?
So, like I mentioned before, there's sort of two camps of sensors that are currently on the market right now. Two different ways of thinking about how to deal with ISO on sensors. On one side is Canon, and Canon cameras, most Canon cameras tend to have a multi-step gain on the ISO, such that the sensor's actually using different amplification for each ISO setting. So there's a distinct difference between ISO 100 and ISO 3200 on the photographs. And it tends to be such that if you use a high enough ISO, it lifts the brightness of the photo above the noise floor. And that tends to give you better images at night or in very dark conditions. So on a Canon camera, you want to make sure that you're above, say, ISO 400 or so. I tend to like, especially on the Canon 6D and the Rebels, I tend to like to tell people to say up to ISO 3200 or higher. The Canon 6D peaks in its noise performance at almost ISO 12800. If you're shooting at ISO 12800 on a Canon 6D, you'll have excellent low noise performance. So there's that camp where you kind of want to keep your ISOs high. And then there's the other camp, which is Sony, Nikon, Fujifilm, all of the modern sensors that Sony is developing for these cameras. So Sony tends to, I think, be the manufacturer for most of those
a good
cameras.
deal of them, yeah.
So they have a different way of doing the amplification on the sensors, and they tend to have like 1 or 2 steps across the entire ISO range. So when you're shooting at ISO 3200, it's actually the same as shooting at ISO 400 on say an A7R. It's the same sensitivity, it's the same gain. And then what Sony is doing is they're sort of artificially amplifying it after the fact, after it's already recorded the photograph. It's done essentially in post. And there's some advantages to that. Those sensors tend to have very low noise floors, and it also doesn't really matter what ISO you set your camera to. You can sort of just, do something that looks right on the LCD, and you can always push or pull it in post-processing.
Right.
And
interesting.
pretty much all of those cameras, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot at ISO 3200 or higher. That gives you a nice visual feedback when you take the photograph. It's going to be bright enough that you can see what you're getting on the LCD after the exposure is made. And it's high enough, especially on a Canon camera, that your noise performance is going to be nice.
And what about in lens focal length? Where would you not go in terms of telephoto? Like how far do you kind of?
So if you want to be able to shoot the night sky and not just have streaks for stars in your image, and you don't want to invest in a fancy equatorial mount that tracks the stars, I tend to think 50 millimeters is a good kind of hard limit on that. If you want to shoot like a landscape, I guess it's sort of same mentality goes, for shooting during the daytime. You're probably not going to shoot, landscapes with something longer than a 50 millimeter lens. It's going to be a very compressed view. And the same thing applies for the Milky Way. The Milky Way takes up a really large portion of the sky. Mm-hmm. And in order to capture it, you're going to need something 50 millimeters or shorter. So you want tend to want a wide angle lens.
I know I once tried to shoot a full moon with a 500 millimeter lens, and it kept sliding out of the frame.
Right.
I mean, it's so narrow. It was moving right aside. I had to keep moving the camera.
Yeah, when you're using
tricky.
a really long lens, it's amazing to see how quickly the Earth is rotating.
Oh, yeah.
Things
You notice it.
Things move quickly. Yeah, and it's funny shooting at night. To spend just an hour out at night and remembering what stars you were seeing and what you were getting in one shot, the beginning of that hour is going to be completely different from the end of the hour, because the Milky Way will move 15 degrees. It's going to be in a completely different portion of the sky. Mm-hmm. You're going to be composing your photos differently. So over the course of the night, it sort of offers like a lot of variety in what you see in the night sky.
When's the best time to photograph the Milky Way? Is there a specific hour or chunk of an hour within the evening?
That's actually a really good question. And actually, it's not necessarily about the hour that you're shooting. It's about the month that you're shooting.
Okay.
So when you see those photographs of the night sky that have the really bright bulge of the galactic center in there,
you can see the gas.
It's almost
like
iconic. Yeah. You can see the dusk lanes in there and nebulas and all that stuff. That's usually made during the northern hemisphere's summer. There's a sort of season, and most astrophotographers are now calling it Milky Way season, and that tends to be from about March-ish to October. Mm-hmm. So from March to October, there's some time during the night when you'll be able to see that galactic center in the northern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere sees it for a little bit longer because they're the galactic center is in kind of the southern half of the sky, so they get to see it a little bit more during the year. In the beginning of the year, in March, you tend to need to shoot right before sunrise. And then in June, July, you can shoot any time during the night. It's the Milky Way galactic center is out almost the entire night. And then in October, you're shooting the very early hours of the night. Right after sunset is when you want to be out there. So with those things in mind, that sort of gives you the idea, during the year of when you want to shoot. And then you want to look for the times during the moon calendar when the moon is sort of between its last quarter and its first quarter, which is closest to the new moon, when the moon essentially isn't in the sky at night. And that'll give you the dark skies where you can really pull out a lot of the detail in the night sky. But I like to shoot with the moon in the shot sometimes too, not necessarily a full moon, but maybe a crescent or like a half illuminated moon, and that can really add a lot of detail on the foreground.
I'm assuming, based on your philosophy, that most any tripod is going to be good enough for what people need to do. Maybe you can say yes or no to that. But then my last question is, what are some common mistakes that beginners should look to avoid when they're out there?
To answer the tripod question, I just use a little travel tripod. It's Suray T025X. It's relatively small. I'm not super tall. I'm only like 5'7", so I don't need a really tall tripod. And I like to use really low compositions.
You do.
Yeah.
So for getting trees or something in the
Right,
foreground.
right.
Yeah.
So that doesn't require a very large tripod.
Would you recommend though generally that people get the camera up above them so they can look through the viewfinder or the LCD?
Yeah, I think people should find a tripod that is comfortable for them to use. You know, I mean, if you're 6'3" and if you were to use my tripod, you'd hate it because it's so short. You definitely want something such that you can shoot comfortably standing up.
And preferably without too much of a center column to add extra.
Right. Yeah. So center columns, I tend to shoot with mine off, so that you have the kind of best triangulation to the ground.
Yeah.
And that would be definitely a recommendation. Is finding a tripod that's tall enough without having to extend that center column. I really like using carbon fiber tripods. The one that I use, the Suray, is carbon fiber, and from a standpoint of stiffness, it's a little better than aluminum, and from a standpoint of weight,
It's lighter.
yeah, it's better to be able to carry out.
Not
at
cold to the
night.
touch on those cold nights.
That's another big one too. Yeah. I've been out photographing when it was below zero, and
It's amazing how cold tripods can
it
get.
can be brutal. Yeah, you grab an aluminum tripod and it just sucks all the heat out of your hands. Yeah, I think that a ball head is pretty much a must. If you're shooting on it with a kind of the video pan tilt head, it can be a little more difficult to get your compositions quickly. And so I usually recommend that somebody find a tripod that they're willing to take anywhere.
Yeah.
And preferably one that when you lock it actually keeps the camera in position that it was when you hit the lock lever.
Yeah, that's of course. Yeah, I mean I like my little tripod. I think I probably wouldn't want to use if I had a DSLR like a 6D or a 5D Mark III, because the ball head on is really small. It's great for mirrorless, but it's sort of chosen specifically for my camera.
Okay. And in terms of like just some general mistakes, some things to avoid, what do you see out there a lot of people doing?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones is not shooting at a high enough ISO. You really want the ISO to be high enough such that it's elevating the picture brightness. You don't want to go out there and shoot at ISO 100 because you take a photo, even if you're using a long exposure, it's going to be dark on the LCD. When you've spent the time to go find a dark sky location, a national park or something like that, and it has low light pollution, it's really dark out there. And
It's counterintuitive though, because you say, no, I want fine detail.
right, yeah, you don't want
But
noise.
it's really
you don't want
working
noise,
against
yeah.
you.
So yeah, shooting at ISO 100 can be detrimental to the quality of the photograph. If you kept everything the same on your settings, you use the same f number and the same shutter time, and then you varied just the ISO on the camera. You shot at ISO 100 all the way up to 6400 or 12800. You would find that the higher quality photo came from the higher ISO photo, especially on a Canon camera. If you do that on a Canon 6D, that ISO 100 picture will be unusable. But shoot at ISO 12800 on that 6D, and it's going to be an amazing photograph.
Is it a good assumption that one should turn the image stabilization system off in the camera?
Yes.
Because that could just wreck everything you're doing, right?
Yeah. So especially lens-based image stabilization tends to be really sensitive. And forgetting to turn the image stabilization off can turn your stars into little UFOs or something. They'll move around.
A lot of
during the
photographers
shot.
aren't aware of that, especially newbies. That if you're putting your camera on a tripod, turn the image stabilization off. It actually works against you.
Yeah, definitely. I'll often get an email from somebody that's like, I'm trying to shoot the Milky Way, and I've got the settings right. Figured that out. I got a good lens, and I went out last night, and I came out with nothing. And usually it's because they're facing the wrong direction. They're pointing their camera north when the Milky Way was to the south, or maybe they were shooting at the wrong time of year, or and the wrong direction, such that the portion of the sky that they were shooting was essentially just a few stars here and there.
Right.
What about white balance? Is it daylight or is it auto? Where should you be? Because right.
Yeah, so I usually like to tell people when they're first starting out to just use auto white balance.
yeah.
You know, the camera's already set to it likely, so use auto white balance.
And you're shooting
it'll
raw,
be
which is
fine.
correctable anyway. But
Right,
still, just
exactly.
curious, where would you be?
So I like to use daylight for the most part.
That would make sense to me.
If you want to photograph straight out of the camera, that tends to look very balanced. You can set a custom temperature of 3,900 Kelvin. And 3,900 Kelvin, that's like roughly sort of the corrected white balance for most light pollution sources. Pretty much anywhere you're going to go, you're going to have a little bit of light pollution in there, even the very, very dark sky places, unless you're maybe in the middle of Nevada or at Death Valley or something like that. To completely avoid light pollution, you can sometimes shoot in a place where there won't be any. But usually there's a town nearby that's going to give a little bit of orange glow on the image. And if you shoot at 3,900 Kelvin, it tends to compensate for that, and it'll keep the stars looking, nice and white and really have like a nice balance. So for the question of, I'm shooting a photograph of the Milky Way and I'm not getting any stars, and, why am I not pointing in the right direction? There's a really great app for that, actually. On iOS, there's an app called Sky Guide. And Sky Guide has a photographically realistic representation of the Milky Way on it, and it uses the cell phone's accelerometers and compass to point
you at it.
Yeah, you point your cell phone in the direction that you're looking, and you can see what portion of the night sky is visible. And it's cool because you can zoom out and see where the Milky Way currently is.
Any other apps that you can kind of throw at us, especially?
Yeah.
Or Android now, if it's not.
Yeah, so Photo Pills is a really, really great app. Probably my top recommendation if you're on iOS. Photo Pills has a really cool tool that allows you to see a sort of 2D representation of the Milky Way and where it will stretch across the sky, from north to south or wherever it happens to be in the night sky. Really, really great tools in Photo Pills. And for Android, there's one called Planet for photographers. It's very similar to Photo Pills, a little less refined on the interface, but it has some very similar tools allow you to pre-visualize where the Milky Way is going to be in the night sky. There's a similar app to Sky Guide that's available on Android called Stellarium Mobile. And Stellarium Mobile is similar to Sky Guide. It allows you to sort of point your camera in the right direction and see, what's going to be there at any given time of night.
We're going to take a short break and come back with more on astrophotography with Ian Norman.
If you'd like to reach out to us with your questions or comments, email us at podcast@bhphoto.com.
What about the aesthetics of astrophotography? We touched on a little bit early on where, again, we're all taking pictures of the sky. It's the same sky. It always has been and always will be. It's the sky.
Yeah, like once you master that perfect shot of the full Milky Way, let's say, across the sky, where do you want to go from there? What do you, and I know you mentioned earlier that you like to include landscape, but what are you interested in as a photographer?
Points of reference, I would imagine, are pretty critical for this.
Yeah, I think the thing that really mixes it up is where you go. You can sort of think of astrophotography as it's sort of like taking your photographs at magic hour, right? Like you want the sunlight to be low and, the shadows to be nice and soft. And I can sort of think of it the same way. Like shooting the night sky is shooting at like a different magic hour, this secret magic hour after dark that nobody, knows about.
The really magic hour.
Yeah, the really magic hour. And, or like shooting a sunset. Essentially we're shooting a photograph of the sun, right? And it's what you put in the rest of the frame that really makes it interesting. So, I tend to like to find those really amazing landscapes. And, I think it's something that's where you bring your style to the photograph. That's where you have a lot of leeway on your composition. It also tends to be why I recommend wide angle lenses, because if you want to capture, a particular portion of the night sky and a landscape in it, you're going to want a really, really wide angle view.
And is there one spot in the world that's kind of considered the best spot for
Southern Hemisphere in general?
anywhere?
Yeah,
any dark
yeah.
spot?
They tend to so they have a slightly longer Milky Way season because the galactic center doesn't set below the horizon as early in the year, basically. And that just has to do with just their position on the Earth relative to our view, our being the Earth's view of the galaxy.
The Atacama Desert or something down there?
Yeah, Atacama Desert in Chile, or areas in Patagonia, New Zealand. The winters in the Southern Hemisphere, which is our summer, so the same time of year, that span between March and October, tends to be a good time, but it's going to be colder down there because it's their winter. But that means they have longer nights. They have a really great view of the Milky Way.
Right. And you were talking earlier about the landscapes and what you put into your frame. Do you often paint with light a little bit when you're doing, let's say, astrophotography? And in your mind, what's the difference between, let's say, night photography and astrophotography?
That's a good question.
This is actually something that I think maybe is debated in the astrophotography community. I think that I've actually had a few people comment on some of my work and say, oh, that's not really astrophotography. Like, I've got a $10,000 telescope. That's astrophotography. And I kind of disagree with that. I think as long as you're sort of putting stars in your image, I think it qualifies for astrophotography. And I think that landscape astrophotography, using a simple camera with a wide-angle lens and a tripod, no other fancy equipment than that, is a great starting point to sort of jump into the world of astrophotography. The concepts are the same. We're using long exposures at night. We're trying to gather a lot of light. And those are the same things that the sort of more enthusiast astrophotographer with a telescope and a dedicated CCD imager, they're thinking about the same exact thing, even though their equipment is significantly more expensive and more complex and requires more setup time. The underlying concepts are similar. So whether you're shooting a landscape or you're shooting, a deep sky object like the Lagoon Nebula, I think that you can call both of those things astrophotography. Ultimately, we're taking a photograph of our galaxy.
You talked a little bit about dark sky parks, which is something I'd never heard of. Can you talk about that? And here we are on the East Coast. I know you're maybe more of a West Coast guy, but any spots in particular within driving distance of New York City that you could recommend? Or
I mean, upstate New York is actually pretty dark. The
There are some
Adirondacks.
good here. You go about an hour north of here, and there's some very dark skies. There are.
Pretty great.
Are there any problems being close to an ocean? Is that better or worse? Does it make a difference?
It can be better and worse. So it sort of depends on weather conditions. The ocean can create a lot of humidity at night, and that'll tend to, for one, the humidity will actually pick up light pollution. If it's condensed, it'll actually sort of haze out the sky with light pollution. But if you are near the coast in a dark sky area, you can actually get some pretty cool photographs, because the haze of the moisture in the air will sort of amplify the colors of the stars. It's sort of like using like a haze filter or a fog filter on your lens. You'll get maybe a less sharp image, but it'll actually bring out the tones of the stars. And the stars actually come in all kinds of different colors, reds and yellows and blues. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But the dark sky parks, is that what you call them? Or dark sky? I mean, what's
so there's a really
that?
cool organization called the International Dark Sky Association, the IDA. Their website is darksky.org. And they approach local municipalities and parks, and they try to help them implement better lighting practices to help preserve the night sky. Obviously, if you tried to shoot the meteor shower in New York City, you probably wouldn't come out with anything. street lamps tend to be a really big source of light pollution, particularly the sodium vapor lamp, which is sort of that orange street light that you're used to seeing. A lot of them are being replaced by newer LED lamps, which can be kind of a blessing and a curse. A lot of the newer lamps have good shading on it so that they're not transmitting a whole bunch of light up into the sky. It's just going on the ground where you want it. So they're more efficient, definitely friendlier at night, but they're also brighter. Which can be detrimental. So as long as they're sort of implemented in the right way, they can be beneficial to helping preserve the night skies. So the International Dark Sky Association has created what they call like designated dark sky parks. And they've essentially given certification to these communities or parks that have implemented good practices at night and have sort of made the pledge to continue to try and preserve their night skies. And it's really cool because even with all these new lighting technologies and demand for people to visit these places, there's still a way that they can light these places and keep them, safe at night for drivers, while still preserving our view of the cosmos.
Okay. Ian, people who want to follow you and follow your work, what website should they go to? Where should they go?
You can find all of my blog posts. I've got gear reviews and tutorials and a lot of newbie-friendly stuff about night sky photography on lonelyspec.com.
Which is a nice site. I was looking at it yesterday and the day before.
Thank you.
Some good stuff on there.
I also frequent Instagram. My personal Instagram is instagram.com/inorman. iNorman for Ian Norman. And you can find some of my night photography on there, as well as some of the stuff that I take just on Diana and my travels.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you to my partners in crime, John Harris and Jason Tables, and a special thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you've been listening to, please rate us and leave a review on iTunes. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of everybody in the studio, thank you so much for tuning in today.